I want to tell you about the morning my doctor looked at my chart and just shook his head. Not angry, worse than angry, tired, like he'd seen the same page 100 times that week, and mine was just one more copy of it. My blood sugar was creeping up the way water creeps up a basement floor, slow enough that you don't notice until your boots are already wet. And when he asked me what I ate for breakfast, I told him the truth. A bowl of cereal, the kind with the cartoon rooster on the box, same one I'd been eating since my own children were small. He didn't tell me to stop eating it. He just asked me to read the label out loud to him at my next visit. So I did. And what I read out loud to that man changed the next 30 days of my life. And I am going to tell you exactly what I changed and exactly what happened day by day near enough, because nobody warned me either, and I don't want you finding this out the hard way, the way I did. I am not a doctor, and I am not going to pretend to be one. I am a grandmother who got scared enough to pay attention. And what I found out is that the one thing sitting in my cereal bowl every morning for probably 40 years was doing something to my body that had nothing to do with how hungry I felt or how many calories the box claimed. It was about how fast that food turned into sugar in my blood and how hard my own body had to work every single morning to clean up after it. Nobody ever explained that part to me, not my own mother, not the pamphlets they hand you in the doctor's waiting room, not one single commercial in 70 years of watching that rooster smile at me from a grocery shelf. Let me back up, because I think you need to see the whole morning, not just the ending of it. I was 68 years old, sitting on that little crinkly paper on the exam table, and the nurse had already taken my blood before I even sat down good. My doctor is a young man, younger than my own son, and he has a way of going quiet before he says something he doesn't want to say. He went quiet that morning. He turned the monitor toward me so I could see the numbers myself, and he said, "Rosie, this is the 3rd visit in a row these have climbed." And I sat there feeling about as foolish as I've felt in years, because I thought I was doing everything right. I walked the dog every morning. I didn't touch soda. I gardened. I thought a body that worked that hard couldn't possibly be in trouble. But trouble doesn't care how hard you work in the afternoon if the very first thing you feed it in the morning is working against you before your feet even hit the porch steps. Here is the plain version, the kind my own grandmother would have understood without a single medical word in it. Refined cereal, the kind that pours quiet and sits in milk without fighting back, breaks down almost the second it hits your stomach. It turns to sugar fast. Your blood sugar climbs high and it climbs quick, and your body panics a little and dumps out insulin to bring it back down. And that insulin does its job so well that it often brings you down lower than where you started. That's why so many of us used to eat a big bowl of cereal at 7 and stand in the kitchen hungry again by 9:30, digging through the cabinet for something else. It wasn't a lack of discipline. It was a food that spiked us up and dropped us down like a seesaw, with nobody sitting on the other end to balance it. I used to think that shaky, hollow feeling mid-morning was just my own body being difficult. Turns out my body was doing exactly what I'd trained it to do every single day for 4 decades. So here's what I did. For 30 days, I swapped that one breakfast, and only that one, for 2 eggs cooked plain in a little butter. Nothing else in my morning changed. Same coffee, same time I woke up, same walk with the dog after. One swap. And I want you to understand why eggs, because it isn't just an old wives' notion, it's the same plain mechanism working the opposite direction. Eggs are almost entirely protein and fat, with barely any of the kind of carbohydrate that turns into fast sugar. Protein and fat break down slow. There's no spike, so there's no crash. Your body isn't scrambling to clean up a mess it didn't need to make in the first place. Now let me walk you through those 30 days properly, because I kept a little notebook on the kitchen windowsill the whole time. The same kind of notebook my mother used to keep her canning dates in, and I wrote something down most every morning. I want to share it honestly, the bad mornings along with the good ones, because anybody selling you a story with no bad mornings in it is selling you something, not telling you the truth. The first 3 mornings, I will tell you honestly, I missed that cereal. Not the taste of it so much as the habit of it, the pouring and the crunching and not having to think. Eggs meant a pan, a little more washing up, a little more time standing at the stove before my coffee had even finished dripping. My husband teased me the second morning, asked if I was opening a diner in his kitchen. Day 2, I wrote in that notebook, tired, cranky, missed the crunch. I'm not going to pretend that first stretch felt like some kind of miracle. It felt like work, plain and simple, the same as anything new does before your body learns the new shape of it. By day 5, something happened that caught me off guard. I made it to lunch without that gnawing, shaky feeling I'd had most mornings of my adult life and just accepted as normal. I thought that was simply what being hungry felt like. Turns out, it was what a blood sugar crash felt like, and I'd been calling it hunger for 40 years because nobody had ever shown me the difference. I wrote that down and underlined it twice because it felt like something worth underlining. By the end of the first week, I noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore around 10 in the morning, which I hadn't even realised was a regular thing until it stopped being one. I used to keep a peppermint in my apron pocket for that exact stretch of the morning, 10 o'clock, 10:30, and I'd pop one in my mouth and figure that was just what a body my age did. Well, I stopped reaching for that peppermint sometime in that first week and didn't even notice I'd stopped until I found 3 of them still wrapped in the bottom of my apron pocket a week later. The second week is where things really started to turn. My daughter came by on a Tuesday, the way she does most weeks, and she said, "Mum, you're not falling asleep in your chair after lunch anymore." And she was right. That mid-afternoon slump, the one where I'd sit down to read and wake up an hour later with the book on the floor and my glasses knocked sideways, it had quietly stopped happening. I didn't plan for that. I was only trying to help an old woman's blood sugar number look better on a piece of paper for a doctor half my age. I wasn't expecting my afternoons back, but there they were, sitting there waiting for me like a room in my own house I'd forgotten I had. Somewhere around day 11, I had a rough patch worth telling you about, honestly. We had a church breakfast that Sunday, the kind with the big trays of cinnamon rolls and the sausage gravy my friend Dolores makes that I have never once turned down in 30 years of knowing her. And I stood there at that table and I thought, well, one morning won't hurt anything. And I ate the cinnamon roll. And I want to tell you, within maybe 40 minutes I felt exactly the way I used to feel every single morning of my life, and had simply forgotten I could feel that way. Jittery, then heavy, then hungry again, before the second church hour was even over. That one cinnamon roll taught me more about what that cereal had been doing to me for 40 years than any pamphlet ever could have. It wasn't a punishment. It was just information. Plain as a weather vane, telling you which way the wind is blowing. I went right back to my eggs the next morning and didn't feel a bit of guilt about the roll, because now I understood the trade I was making every time I chose one over the other. By day 20, I stepped on the scale, which I hadn't touched on purpose during any of this, and I was down a little over 4 pounds. Not from starving myself. I ate the same amount at lunch and supper as I always had, same portions, same suppers my husband has eaten for 42 years of marriage. The only thing that changed was that one bowl of cereal every morning turned into 2 eggs. My theory, and I've read enough since then to believe it isn't just my own theory, is that when your blood sugar isn't spiking and crashing all morning, your body isn't sending you false hunger signals trying to chase that crash back up. You eat because you're actually hungry, not because your blood sugar just fell off a cliff and your brain is begging you to catch it before you hit the ground. Now, I want to be honest with you about the day I nearly quit the whole thing. Day 12, not counting the cinnamon roll Sunday. I was tired of eggs. Plain tired. The way you get tired of anything you eat every day without variation. The way even a favourite hymn gets thin if you sing nothing else for a month straight. So I want to save you that trouble, because you don't need to eat the same 2 eggs for 30 straight mornings the way I stubbornly did, just to prove a point to myself. Scramble them one day, fold them into an omelette with a little cheese and some of the peppers out of the garden the next. A soft-boiled egg with toast points, if bread doesn't bother your own body the way sugar bothered mine. The point was never the eggs specifically. The point was the swap, trading a fast sugar breakfast for a slow, steady one. If eggs aren't for you, plain Greek yogurt with a small handful of walnuts does close to the same thing. So does 2 sausage patties and nothing else, or a bit of leftover chicken from the night before, which sounds strange for breakfast until you've tried it and realised your grandmother's grandmother probably ate exactly that and thought nothing of it. The mechanism is what matters, not the exact plate sitting in front of you. Somewhere around the 3rd week, my husband, who had been teasing me about the diner for 2 weeks straight, quietly started eating the eggs with me instead of his own toast and jam. He never announced it. I just started noticing there were 4 eggs cracked into the pan instead of 2. Men do that sometimes, come around to a thing sideways instead of head-on, and I let him do it his own way without making a fuss over it, because making a fuss is usually the fastest way to send a man right back to his toast out of pure stubbornness. By week 4, my sleep had changed too, and this is the part that surprised me most of anything in that whole month, because I hadn't set out to fix my sleep at all. I used to wake up most nights somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, wide awake for no reason I could ever name, heart going a little fast, and I'd lay there till near dawn most times before drifting off again. That stopped happening sometime in the 3rd week, and I only noticed because my husband mentioned he hadn't heard me creaking down to the kitchen in the middle of the night for a glass of milk in a good while. I've read since then that a blood sugar crash in the deep night can do exactly that, wake a body up out of a sound sleep, same as a spike does in the daytime. And I believe it, because something changed in those nights that I never once asked to change. At day 30, I went back to that same young doctor, and I watched him read my numbers twice before he said anything, which told me plenty on its own before he opened his mouth. My fasting blood sugar had come down more than he expected from one change. Not fixed, I want to say that plainly, because I'm not selling you a miracle, and 30 days of eggs did not cure decades of habit sitting in my kitchen cabinet. But it moved. And it moved because of one swap made every single morning, without fail except for one cinnamon roll I've already confessed to you, for 30 days straight. He asked me what else I'd changed, and I told him the truth. Nothing. Not one other thing. And he sat back in his chair and didn't say anything for a moment. And I understood that quiet, the same way I'd understood the quiet on the first visit. Except this time, it wasn't the bad kind. Here's what I think nobody tells us. And it isn't some conspiracy, it's just the plain truth of what sells and what doesn't. A box of sugared cereal sits on a shelf for a year and costs almost nothing to make. It has a rooster on it and a cheerful jingle behind it, and it gets marketed straight at tired mothers trying to get children out the door before the bus comes. Same as I was 40 years ago with my own 3. Nobody is standing in the cereal aisle whispering in your ear about insulin and blood sugar, because there's no company getting rich off you frying 2 eggs in your own kitchen with your own butter and your own 2 hands. The market rewards what sells fast and cheap and easy, not what's quietly doing right by your body every single morning without asking for a dime in return. That's not a bottle of medicine anybody profits from. That's just a woman standing at her own stove, same as women have done for longer than any of us have been alive. I think about my own grandmother sometimes when I stand at that stove now. She never once poured cereal from a box in her life. Breakfast in her house was eggs from her own hens, or oats she'd soaked the night before, or whatever was left from supper warmed back up in the skillet. She didn't have a doctor showing her a monitor with numbers climbing on it. She just had what was on the farm. And it turned out what was on the farm was closer to right than what showed up in a cardboard box with a rooster on it 70 years later. I don't say that to make anybody feel bad about their own breakfast. I ate that cereal for 40 years, and I loved it, and I'm not ashamed of a single bowl. I only say it because I think we lost something plain and useful somewhere along the way. And it's worth finding again. I want to tell you a little about the mornings now, a full 2 months past that 30-day mark, because people always ask me if I went back to the cereal once the experiment was done. I didn't. Not really. I'll eat it now and again at my granddaughter's house when she pours me a bowl with that same rooster smiling up at me, and I enjoy it, same as I always did, because I'm not interested in making foods into villains, only in understanding what they're doing while they're in my body. But my own kitchen, most mornings, still starts with eggs. It's just what my hands reach for now, the same automatic way they used to reach for that cereal box for 4 decades running. My numbers at my last visit had come down further still, and my doctor, who doesn't hand out compliments free of charge, told me I'd done in a season what he usually watches take a year or better with medication alone. I'm not telling you that to brag on myself. I'm telling you because if an old woman set in her ways for 40 years could change one bowl and watch her whole morning change under her, then whatever's sitting in your own bowl right now is worth a second look too. So if there is one thing I'd ask you to take from an old woman who was as surprised as anyone by what one swap did in 30 days, it's this. Look at the very first thing that touches your body every morning and ask yourself honestly whether it's setting you up steady or setting you up for a spike and a crash you've been calling normal your whole life, the way I did. You don't have to change your whole kitchen. I didn't. I changed one bowl, and I gave it 30 honest mornings before I let myself judge whether it was worth keeping. Tell me in the comments what's sitting in your own breakfast bowl right now and whether you'd be brave enough to swap it for 30 days and see what your own body tells you when nobody's watching but you. I read every single one of them, and I'll tell you plainly, some of the best ideas I've ever tried came from someone else's grandmother in a comments section, not my own kitchen. Next time, I want to show you the one swap I made at supper that surprised me even more than this one did, and the reason it took me even longer to admit I'd been doing it wrong all these years. Bring your appetite and bring a little patience, because the good changes are almost never the fast ones. They're just the honest ones, kept up morning after morning until your own body starts telling you they were worth it.